There is a reason why policy should not be developed based on emotions following an unlikely event. And California shows exactly why. In other not-so news, the Anglosphere's extremist laws and policies regarding sex hit again. The glass ceiling for dogs becomes a serious topic. I wish I were joking. And emotional support pets are suddenly a thing that we're supposed to believe people can't live without for a few hours. These are our stories on Periodic Insanity. Hello everyone and welcome to the 18th installment of Periodic Insanity. Alright, so it's been quite a crowded month already, both in good news terms and in terms of insanity. The inherent progress in all of this is that the amount of good news is increasing, whilst the amount of insanity stays rather constant. But someone's gotta look at the insanity too. Alright, so let's slowly dive into some of it, the one that did make the cut, that is. Coming via Reuters, glass ceiling for dogs, males win Westminster almost twice as often. Why? Why can't we just helicopter these people? There used to be a time when reading the news on Reuters was a serious activity for serious people. Anyway, so it goes like this. Quote, after the German Shepherd Rumor won the top prize at last year's Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show in New York, she had her first litter of puppies and retired from competition like many female show dogs. By contrast, most top male show dogs can keep competing for years, and it is no coincidence that they also win Best in Show in the prestigious annual competition far more often than females, breeders and handlers said as they prepared for this year's show, which opens on February the 12th in New York. Now she won't show again, she's done, says Gail Miller-Bisher, a spokeswoman for the Westminster Kennel Club, referring to Rumor. But males can keep going. They can be used as stud and continue showing and keep their coat and keep their shape for body and all that. Female dogs, known in purebred circles as bitches, have snarled Best in Show at Westminster 39 times since the award was first given in 1907. Males, known simply as dogs, have been victorious 71 times, almost twice as often. A dog's peak age for competition is 3 to 5 years old, which also happens to be prime breeding age for females, said Kimberly Kalvaka, a professional handler and breeder for Westbury, New York. The Best in Show winner, crowned Tuesday night, takes home a trophy, but the real reward is the increased value on the breeding circuit, which is one reason victory can end a female's competitive career. People don't like to campaign females because they don't like to jeopardize their breeding program, said Kalvaka. Males can be used to stud any time and still show and breed at the same time. As a consequence, females are less likely to compete at Westminster, the second oldest U.S. sporting event after the Kentucky Derby. Ahead of this year's opening day on Monday, there were 1,220 female competitors and 1,699 male challengers enrolled in most categories, including vying to be named top dog on Tuesday at Madison Square Garden. In the end, a male Best in Show winner can bring a bigger payoff than a female because a male can breed many times and even have its sperm frozen, while females can produce only so many litters and puppies, said WKC's Bisher. The males obviously have an easier go of it, whereas the girls having a litter is stressful for everybody, she said. Close quote. What the fuck did I just read? So, newsflash. Dogs are a sexually dimorphic species of mammals. As a result, whatever activities they get involved in, the outcomes of those said activities are heavily influenced by the undeniable biological fact that they are a sexually dimorphic species. How is that news? This is what happens when you allow social activism to flourish unchecked. This is what happens when conservatives are too nice for too long, and instead of stomping these idiots and tell them to shut the fuck up and shun them into oblivion. This is the net result. A formerly respectable top-tier journalism institution puts on its pages news like this. And again, this thing with seeing patriarchy in dogs is an idea that originates from Sweden. That's where it was first uttered. If you don't remember, back in September 2017, a Marxist feminist from Södermalm, Sweden's largest safe space, I made a video about that place, check it out, launched a campaign against dog patriarchy. And I'm not joking. Carola Kostman believes there should be a separate parks for bitches. That would be female dogs. How long did it take? 5 months? Until a piece of insanity from Sweden became front page on Reuters? Terrible! Now, speaking of Scandinavian ideas making their way into real life, coming via Washington Examiner, California overreacts and presumes every homeschooling parent is a child abuser. California is seeking to treat homeschool families as presumptive child abusers. Lawmakers in that state have indicated plans to categorically require homeschool parents to prove, through home visits, interviews, and other government oversight, that indeed the parent is not abusive if they choose to exercise a legally protected and valid option for school choice. This measure would shift the burden to the parent to prove to the government's satisfaction his or her parental fitness. In light of the remarkably horrifying case of Riverside County couple David and Louise Turpin, whose 13 children were reportedly chained, malnourished, and clearly abused, the media and lawmakers have chosen to focus on one coincidental detail. The Turpins were also registered as homeschoolers. Using the Turpins' case as one extreme example to bolster their platform, legislators are now looking to increase government regulations of homeschooling in California, which may lay the groundwork for increased regulation nationwide. Already, state legislators have suggested they will introduce legislation to cure the supposed problem of laxity in private school choice options, which includes homeschooling. Suggested measures have included options for involuntarily quarterly home visits and interviews from Child Protective Services and other government agencies. This kind of government regulation and oversight would reduce the valid legal option of homeschooling from a fundamental parental right to direct the education and school choice for children to compelled consent to government intrusion upon the sanctity and privacy of the home and school choice. These kinds of alarming solutions to an unfounded problem rises to the level of a government search of the family's home and interviews of children under the pretext that homeschool choice infers that parents are more likely to be child abusers. It's a similar illogical path as inferring that because a person chooses to be an independent contractor as a legitimate employment option, they are more likely to evade tax filings, or because a person chooses to exercise any other valid legal options, they are doing so for some other unrelated nefarious purpose, and on that basis alone, the government has grounds to treat them as suspect. Moreover, the data aren't there to support any logical connection between homeschooling as a school choice option and child abuse. In published studies among such experts such as the World Health Organization, the U.S. Commission to Eliminate Child Abuse and Neglect Fatalities, the American Psychological Association, the Mayo Clinic, and others, none of these sources list homeschooling as a risk factor for child abuse and neglect. In other words, there is no evidence or data to even suggest that homeschooled children are being harmed or at a risk of harm at a rate higher than children in other non-homeschooled and private schooling communities. And then it goes on and on and on to explain in great detail why the measure is insane and likely unconstitutional. Now, the question arises, where does this idea come from? Well, if we want to be mean, the first country in the world to ban and crack down on homeschooling was the Third Reich, or the Nazi Germany, and then followed soon by the Soviet Union, although I think the Soviet Union technically had it first, but it didn't crack down on it. Anyway, but in more recent times, the first country to take measures similar, very similar indeed, to what is being considered by Californian lawmakers, among which are included sexual harassers like Cristina Garcia, For more recent times, that country that took similar measures is Norway. Norway, just like present-day California, could not just come out and ban homeschooling because that would have not flied even with the remarkably docile and collectivistic population that these jurisdictions are populated with. So, instead, they came up with ludicrous narratives to justify an ever-increased authoritarian state and an ever-increased encroachment upon the privacy of homes. Around the same period, also using a horrific and otherwise exceptional case, Norway also gave rise to one of the most totalitarian, anti-family and Soviet-style agencies in all of Europe, the Barnevernet, a semi-private, semi-public agency allegedly tasked to intervene in cases where children are facing abuse. In practice, the Barnevernet is a for-profit agency off the back of the taxpayers that sometimes also deals with literally selling children on an open market. And one of their secondary activities is to harass any family that dares to still believe that they have the right to educate their children in the manner they deem fit. The way the Californian lawmakers are describing their new policies, it's almost like they've copy-pasted the Norwegian model. And that's because they likely did. Scandinavian totalitarianism has been regarded as a model for Californian communists for over a decade now, so it would be indeed surprising if those who call themselves lawmakers did not consult Norwegian sources on this. And this is why these things matter. This is why I do make videos from and about Norway and Sweden so much. Not because I care too much about what they're doing to themselves, I assure you I could not care less about that, but because of the multitude of useful idiots who then use the worst ideas from there to implement them upon unsuspecting innocent populations who most definitely did not subscribe to the inherently totalitarian framework of the Jantelagen. And it gets worse than that. Just like in Norway, California is also very disinterested in cracking down on actual child abuse perpetrated by parents, such as the parents encouraging the sterilization of their children using the utterly flawed narrative of transgender children. Just like in Norway, Californian lawmakers consider it to be far worse to homeschool your children than to sterilize them and make them believe they are the opposite sex and set them up for committing suicide before the age of 30. This, my fellow deplorables, is a much more serious issue than taxes. After all, tax avoidance and tax evasion is still a thing, and only idiots really believe that tax evasion is bad, but incentivizing the utter destruction of the next generation, that's really serious business. Because tax evasion, at its worst, collapses a government. This insanity collapses a society. Societies have recovered after their governments had collapsed. This has happened thousands upon thousands of times throughout history. I've never heard of society recovering after their offspring got sterilized and killed itself into oblivion. Have you seen any Romans or Byzantines lately? Anyway, I'll get back to this topic in a more dedicated video because the rabbit hole on all of this is remarkably deep. Until then, let's go to the next piece of insanity where I will likely piss off a portion of my audience. But then again, I would rather be correct than popular. So, coming via the Daily Wire, 22-year-old teacher charged with sexual assault for sex with 18-year-old student. And it goes like this, quote, a 22-year-old former student teacher and a track coach at a Connecticut high school has been charged with a sexual assault for having intercourse and oral sex with an 18-year-old student. Taylor Evie Bonkal met the student in question while she was student teaching at Conard High School in West Hartford. The 18-year-old was in some of her classes, but the two began having sexual relations at the end of December when Bonkal's student teaching gig had ended and she was assigned as an assistant track and field coach at the school. Bonkal has been charged with 3 counts of second-degree sexual assault, according to the police. She's accused of engaging in intercourse and oral sex with the student under a statute that prohibits sexual contact between teachers and students in their schools, reports the Hartford Courant. A concerned parent tipped off school officials about the alleged relationship, said West Hartford School Superintendent Tom Moore on Friday. School officials then notified the police. According to police, the sexual encounters took place at the young woman's home in New Britain from December the 25th to January the 11th. Both the 18-year-old and the former teacher told the police that it was the student who initiated the relationship, asking Bonkal for her phone number in mid-December. The duo began texting one another on December the 13th, close quote. And this is pure lunacy on the behalf of the police and the prosecutors. So, 22-year-old, well actually 21, but we'll stick to that, we'll ignore that part. 21-year-old teaches some class to 18-year-olds. The teaching ends, and after she's done teaching, she hooks up with one of the 18-year-olds and fuck around a little bit, both figuratively and literally. And then some concerned parent, that is to say a third party, unaffected third party, decides to be the moral faggot and goes snitching to the police. Well, first to the superintendent, and then the superintendent becomes the snitch. And then, because everyone in this story has to be insane, the police and the DA decides to charge the 21-year-old with sexual assault, even though the quote-unquote victim is not a child by any means, not a victim by any means, and even the parents and the wider community of the quote-unquote victim is indeed supportive of the couple and not of the convoluted retardation of what these idiots call the law. Way to go, Connecticut! So, if this case had taken place anywhere in Europe, well, it would not have been a case to begin with, since their relationship began after she was no longer his teacher, so it wasn't even a workplace ethics violation. And if it had been, even if it had been while she was still his teacher, she would have been fired and maybe banned for a few years from teaching in that district, but that's pretty much it. To charge someone with assault for an obviously consensual relationship is something which only English-speaking jurisdictions could come up with. Because it's not just Connecticut. All of the English-speaking jurisdictions have laws on the books that are quite frankly extremist and insane by the standards of literally everyone else when it comes to things like statutory rape or statutory assault. As a prime example of absolute extremism with such cases, there is an individual, also a woman, who now lives as a refugee in Canada. She has been sentenced to 30 years for child molestation in Florida. Her crime? She had sex with her lover aged 16 when she was 30. Well, that's what the authorities say because the evidence submitted in the case was murky at best. But let's assume the prosecution was correct. 30 years? She would have gotten off easier if she had shot the boy in the head. Now, this particular type of inconsistencies are not a top priority for me, quite frankly, but it is nevertheless true that such legislation absolutely constitutes insanity. This kind of overly disproportional stance on something which is otherwise not an issue is what ultimately undermines faith in the rule of law. These kinds of cases, and many others far more horrific than these, are what made me very cynical and highly skeptical of the worshipping of the law or the rule of law in general. And the inconsistencies exist everywhere, but they are particularly pernicious in the English-speaking world. So the victim in this case can be forced to go in the middle of the desert to kill in the service of the United States. The law thinks he's perfectly capable of that. The law also thinks he's perfectly capable of driving a car, a highly dangerous activity, not just for himself, but also for those around him. Yet the law does not think he's perfectly capable of choosing who to have sex with. The law also doesn't think he's perfectly capable of buying a pack of cigarettes or a shot of whiskey because the age of drinking in Connecticut is 21, another piece of all-American retardation. Have you ever wondered why arguments concerning the legalization of other drugs bring far more passion in the United States than in Europe? Well, it could be because the traditional vices are much more heavily criminalized in vast parts of the United States than they ever were in Europe. The criminalization of alcohol and teenage sex is far, far worse in vast proportions of the English-speaking world than it ever was in the Soviet Union. And sooner or later, the conservatives will have to become conservatives again instead of moral faggots and realize that what I just said is not a liberal position at all. In fact, it's an inherently traditionalist position, since prior to 1919, none of this insanity existed in the United States or anywhere else, really. Heck, back when my country was a theocracy, prostitution was legal, alcohol was legal from the age of 15, age of consent was just like it is today, 15, and the amount of heavy-handedness of the state over such trivial nonsense was reserved only for serious cases of abuse and not for everyday normal life. Because yes, it is normal for 18-year-olds to have sex with 21-year-olds. So yeah, maybe turning the clock backwards on some issues would be a good idea after all. Alright, let's go to a funnier piece of insanity coming via The Guardian. Student says she flushed emotional support hamster after Spirit Airlines denied passage. I can't read this seriously. Quote, missing a flight can be quite a hassle for your average passenger, but for Peebles, an emotional support dwarf hamster owned by Belen Aldecosea, it was downright deadly. Aldecosea flushed Peebles down an airport toilet after her pet was denied passage on a Spirit Airlines flight on this November the 21st, and she could not figure out any other way to get home to South Florida. The 21-year-old college student said that she had been assured in advance that the hamster could travel with her and said that an airline employee advised her to either flush the animal or let it loose outside. After hours of indecision and unsuccessful attempts to rent a car, the hamster owner chose the former, she told the Miami Herald. She was scared, I was scared, and it was horrifying trying to put her in the toilet, Aldecosea said. I sat there for a good 10 minutes crying in the stall. Derek Dombrovsky, spokesman for Spirit Airlines, acknowledged that the company had mistakenly told Aldecosea that the hamster was permitted to fly, but denied that killing the animal was their idea. We can say confidently that at no point did any of our agents suggest this guest, or any other for that matter, should flush or otherwise injure an animal, Dombrovsky said by email. It is incredibly disheartening to hear this guest reportedly decided to end her own pet's life. Pebbles is just the latest emotional support animal to make headlines in the US. In January, an emotional support peacock named Dexter was barred from traveling on a United Airlines flight despite having been bought its own ticket. In recent weeks, both United Airlines and Delta have cracked down on the wide range of creatures claimed as therapy pets. Such moves have been supported by the union representing flight attendants, which said in a statement that the workers struggle to cope with issues like biting, aggression, urination, defecation, allergic reactions, conflict, and other disruptions. But Adam Goldman, a Miami attorney representing Aldecosea, pushed back on any comparison between Pebble and Dexter. This wasn't a giant peacock that could pose a danger to other passengers, he told the Herald. This was a tiny, cute, harmless hamster that could fit in the palm of her hand. Close quote. Now, it is not... It is not a matter of routine for me to agree with the policies of airliners, because oftentimes they do indeed suck balls. But in this particular case, yeah, they do have a point. I mean, seriously, how come we all have survived for so many decades without emotional support pets with us in the cabin of a flight? This whole business with emotional support pets is something that does indeed need to be cracked down on. You can't travel without your emotional support pet? Then get your own private jet. And no, I don't fall for this, oh, but it's just a tiny hamster claptrap. Yeah, so what? The hamster craps too. The hamster smells too. Why should everyone else be compelled to bear with that? If I were an airliner, I would also introduce policies like these for people as well. If you smell too badly, you don't get on board. But in all seriousness, there needs to be a crackdown on all of this emotional fragility that has been encouraged rather than managed. You want emotional support pets? Then drive. I can't believe this is an issue that keeps on making the news. The whole notion of emotional support pets needs to be helicoptered back into the private sphere where it belongs. But I suspect that won't happen anytime soon because it would be deemed insensitive by the do-gooders du jour. Maybe until someone asks for a cobra or some other bigger snake as an emotional support pet. Maybe then someone will stand up and say enough is really enough. I'm so glad this isn't a thing in Europe. It's one of those rare moments when it's actually better in Europe. Anyway, let's go further. Via the Daily Mail. Mass exodus from Mad Max violence in Venezuela. Thousands flee across bridge to Colombia amid desperate hunger and soaring crime following economic crisis. Yep. It's surprising this hasn't happened earlier, quite frankly. Quote, thousands of desperate Venezuelans are trying to enter Colombia in a bid to escape the hunger and soaring crime rate caused by the spiraling economic crisis. Incredible pictures show the mass exodus of refugees crossing the Simón Bolívar International Bridge trying to flee the political crisis threatening to engulf Venezuela. Colombia, along with its neighbor Brazil, has sent extra soldiers to patrol their porous border with the country after officially taking in more than 500,000 migrants over the last 6 months of 2017. The country is also tightening its border controls in a bid to stem the flow. The dire economic conditions have led to lawlessness in parts of Venezuela's capital Caracas, with truck drivers subjected to Mad Max violence as looters target heavy goods vehicles carrying food. According to Reuters, there were 162 lootings across Venezuela in January, including 42 robberies of trucks. That is compared to just 8 lootings, including one truck robbery 12 months ago. Last month, 8 people were killed in the lootings. Venezuela has one of the world's highest murder rates, and the attacks are pushing up food and transport costs. The truckers are not allowed to carry guns. Well, of course, it's socialism. So having resorted to forming convoys to protect themselves. They text each other warnings about potential trouble spots and keep moving as fast as possible. Massive numbers of Venezuelans have been driven from their homes by a dire financial crisis that has seen many struggling to feed themselves. But the mass migration arrives at a challenging time for Colombia, and lawmakers have moved to tighten border controls. In a visit to a border city at the epicenter of Colombia's mounting migration crisis, President Juan Manuel Santos on Thursday announced new measures that could make it more difficult for Venezuelan migrants to cross into the country illegally or remain there without any official status. Colombia has never lived a situation like the one we are encountering today, Santos said. Migration into Colombia has surged as Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has moved to consolidate his rule and the nation's economy plummets. Colombia migration authorities said there are an estimated 600,000 Venezuelans currently living in Colombia, double the number 6 months ago. Venezuela exile associations and some border city officials have said they believe the number is higher. The unprecedented migration wave is putting strains on Colombia at a delicate time in its history. The nation is crawling out of a 5-decade-long armed conflict following the signing of a peace deal with leftist rebels in 2016. Many of the Venezuelans are arriving illegally and in need of medical attention. This is a tragedy, Santos said, and I want to reiterate to President Maduro, this is a result of your policies. More than 2,000 additional military officers will be deployed to control the hundreds of dirt road crossings known as trojas that dot Colombia's 1,370-mile or 2,200-kilometer border with Venezuela. A new migration patrol unit will also police public spaces where Venezuelan arrivals congregate, provide them with orientation, and to control issues like prostitution that have surfaced in the migration wave's wake, close quote. Notice something? Nobody in Colombia is arguing for amnesty or for completely opening the border to allow the entirety of Venezuela to just walk in. Nobody, not even the left in Colombia, is arguing for a DACA-style program for Venezuelans, or for a diversity lottery, or any of the nonsense peddled incessantly in Europe or the United States. Also, the president of Colombia is not called a racist or a xenophobe, not even in the English language media, for tightening the controls of the border. It's almost as if everyone understands that Colombia needs to take care of itself first before lending a hand to anyone else. As for poor Venezuelans, well, it's not like they haven't been warned, because let's not forget, this mess was voted in by the Venezuelans. They've been warned multiple times over the last 15 years that this is what's going to happen and that they indeed need to stop voting for communists. Now, did they listen? Nope. Meanwhile, Colombia has been fighting a bloody civil war with the left for several decades, and 100% of the adult population in Colombia today knows full well what happens when you allow the left to roam unhelicoptered for too long. So of course Colombia is much better. It doesn't take a genius to figure that one out. Ultimately, what I do fear the most is that Venezuelans will not learn the lesson. Even at this late stage, there hasn't been any assassination attempt against Nicolás Maduro. No serious attempt at a coup d'etat, and the amount of political violence by the people against the government has been negligible so far. Why? And I'm not trying to be a smartass here. This is a serious question. Why don't Venezuelans try harder to helicopter the left? Because make no mistake, there is no peaceful solution here. The time for that has kinda long passed. Recently, Maduro, just 2 months ago, orchestrated another purge to make sure no rivals with some more market-friendly views can replace him. Other than foreign intervention, there aren't much options left on the table, and the ones still on the table do absolutely involve violence. Heck, we killed Ceausescu for a lot less than that. As I explained a few episodes ago, the situation now in Venezuela is worse than late 1980s Romania, and late 1980s Romania, believe me, was really bad in and of itself. So what gives? The level of power wielded by Maduro is comparable to the level of power wielded by Ceausescu, so I am not buying the argument that it's impossible to stage a revolt and a coup d'etat. If we could do it without the internet and much more hampered telecommunications, then there really is no excuse for Venezuelans not to at least try. I mean, seriously, what do you even have got to lose at this point? You can't just all leave to Colombia, and even if you could, there is no guarantee that you'll be able to stay there. Also, Brazil will likely elect a legit right-winger soon enough who wants to crack down on criminality and illegal aliens, so you won't be able to stay in Brazil either. And since you are fleeing leftism, the American left won't be your friend either. So I ask again, what exactly do Venezuelans stand to lose? I know there are at least 4 Venezuelan subscribers on this channel. Maybe one of you can enlighten me, either in the comment section or via email. But it's really baffling at this point why there hasn't been any serious attempts at this. I mean, sure, it's not a guarantee, no guarantee that a coup d'etat would be successful or that a violent uprising won't be suppressed, but it is an absolute guarantee that not doing anything will only result in things getting even worse. And as I always say, yes, it can be a lot worse. Rock bottom is quite a nasty business. That's why I always laugh at Greek protesters who used to claim that Greece had reached rock bottom. Kids, please. Y'all still have electricity, functioning ATM machines, and are allowed to leave the country. Far from rock bottom, believe me. Anyway, to sum up this point, everyone needs to brace themselves for violence, because the pacifist ship has already sailed. Violence is the only thing that will solve the Venezuelan crisis. The question now is who will be more determined and what level of violence will be enough. I really hope that as we speak, some resistance leaders are cutting a deal with the deep state of some neighbor for an uprising and coup sponsorship. Because if not, then a lot more death and a lot more oppression is coming. And finally, one more piece of insanity coming via BBC. Tesco faces record £4 billion equal pay claim. Thousands of women who work in Tesco stores could receive back pay totaling £20,000 if the legal challenge demanding parity with men who work in the company's warehouses is successful. Lawyers say hourly paid female store staff earn less than men even though the value of the work is comparable. Tesco said it worked hard to ensure all staff were paid fairly and equally. Paula Lee of Lee Solicitors told the BBC it was time for Tesco to tackle the problem of equal pay for work of equal worth. Her firm has been contacted by more than 1,000 Tesco staff and will this week take the initial legal steps for 100 of them. The most common rate for women is £8 an hour, whereas for men the hourly rate can be as high as £11 an hour, she added, close quote. And then the article goes on with a lot of sub-stories from, well, essentially entitled cunts. Alright, so here's the deal. There is no way to prove such thing as work of equal worth. Such concept is ludicrous in and of itself. Even the concept of equal work is dodgy to say the least, because even though worker A and worker B may do the same work for the same amount of time, that still doesn't automatically mean equal work. This is true in all areas of the economy, from warehouses to call centers to cashiers, you name it. But in this particular case brought against Tesco, the issue should be thrown out in the garbage disposal and laughed off the stage. In a normal world. But we're talking about the United Kingdom here, so very, very far away from the normal world. The United Kingdom is the country where you go to jail for quoting Winston Churchill in public, but walk scot-free if you rape 9-year-old children, provided you have the correct race and religious background, that is. So in this absolutely abnormal country, there are authorities who are legitimately taking into consideration the ridiculous argument that the state not only could, but should regard the work of cashiers laying in on their butts most of the time as not only comparable but equal in worth with the work of the warehousemen who carry around large weights, require significant training in operating dangerous machinery, and are also liable for any destruction in a place where even a minor destruction could cost more than their annual wage. In a normal world, such argument would be laughed off the stage. But not in the United Kingdom, where the taxpayers-funded BBC gives these entitled cunts a huge platform to whine on. Here, let me read you this excerpt. Where the hell is... Oh, here it is. Quote, "Two workers from Tesco told the BBC they wanted fair treatment, arguing that their jobs in the stores were as demanding as warehouse jobs. Pam Jenkins has been working for Tesco for 26 years. I think that we should be brought up to the men's level, she told me. Obviously, the jobs are slightly different, but to put it bluntly, they are of equal value. We deal with customers. They don't have to. We load, we take the stock and we load the stock. They take it off the lorry and we load it on the shelves. Women have been fighting for equal rights and their voice to be heard for 100 years. We're not just doing it for us. There are many people out there. We're just trying to put things right, and it's a shame we still have to fight in this day and age." Close quote. Obviously, the jobs are slightly different. Yeah, no shit, lady. After all, a warehouse will process more goods than any checkout cashier. So in pure shekels, the warehouse workers will absolutely provide more value. The fact that this train of thought of these two roles being equal, this is being entertained outside a comedy show, is a fine example of how degenerated the mainstream regulatory culture has gotten. Now, I've never worked for Tesco, obviously, but I did work in my teenage years for a comparable store. Back in my day, the warehousemen would also stock the shelves while the cashiers had fewer responsibilities, which is why I was never a cashier, because I wanted more money rather than easier work. Would I have ever joined if I had been paid the same as the cashier? Of course not. Why would I work a lot more to be paid the same as someone who works a lot less? And this is the crux of the matter. This lawsuit is the result of the highly resentful leeches incentivized by highly litigious and, yes, greedy motherfucking lawyers who are using the crooked narrative of gender communism, or feminism, whatever, same shit, to extort a protection fee from a lawful business using the government. And as long as feminism is not treated the way it should be, and as long as the government is so big, this kind of horseshit will not be over. Now, do you understand why you should never employ women? Because of horseshit like this, that's why. Now, if I were Tesco, I would just fire them all and automate the checkout. It sure does cost less than £4 billion to do so. And also replace the checkout workers with big-muscled men to make sure the clients don't try to sneak out goods past the machine without paying for them. And that's it. The machine won't complain of a pay gap. The machine doesn't require NHS contributions, doesn't require paid leave, maternity leave, and all of the rest of the horseshit punitive taxes sold to the plebs under the guise of social protection. No, fuck you and your social protection. God damn it, feminism is cancer. Any compromise that doesn't include the full and complete shunning of all the individuals involved in cancerous scams like these is not a compromise worth making. These people need to be stopped, and they will be stopped. The question is whether they will be stopped the easy way or the hard way. Because in economics, there is the underlying law that says that what cannot go on will not go on. And this cannot go on for much longer. Businesses cannot go on forever facing bollocks like this. It's just not feasible. Tesco would be better off moving entirely to Germany, or even better, to Colombia. Because there is no way this can be sustained. If they raise the store floor wages, there will be a shortage of warehouse workers. I know I would file for a transfer if I could do a far easier job for the same money. If they cut the wages of the warehouse workers, then again, shortage of warehouse workers. Why would most people, men or women, stick around to a very hard job if their pay has been cut purely for ideological reasons? Why stay in a warehouse job and risk death, because yes, you can die from being crushed, for instance, for fewer money? But then again, feminists aren't known for being too active in the thinking department. Complete madness. Alright, that's enough for this episode. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for your continuous support. And I'll see you all very soon, because there is a lot of practical politics to be explained. So, see you all soon. Cheers.